Welcome to the digital summit of the Global Landscape Forum. I'm Michael Stanley Jones with United Nations Environment Program from Nairobi. This digital summit is part of the Investment Case Symposium that the Global Landscape Forum is holding today in Washington, D.C. I'd like to introduce our guests who will help us with aspects of today's online agenda, which is on fashion and the Sustainable Development Goals, subtitled Sustainable Supply Chains. Well, we'll learn more about what a sustainable supply chain is in a moment. But first, let me introduce our three guests. Kaya Dory is the founder of Novel Supply Company, a sustainable apparel line made in her hometown of Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada. As the 2007 recipient of the Young Champion of the Earth North America Prize, a prize awarded by UN Environment and Converstro, she is striving to create a zero-waste, closed-loop model that takes responsibility for products that she's making. She aims to shift the industry to one that is more ethical, affordable, and sustainable. Opposite kitty corner from her, on my screen at least, is Dr. Amanda Parks. Amanda is a fashion scientist with over 15 years of experience in wearable technology, interaction design, smart materials, and fashion innovation. As a biomedia designer and fashion technologist, Amanda stands at the intersection of new media, textiles, and fashion. She's been a lecturer at the World Economic Forum. Her work has appeared in The Business of Fashion, Vanity Fair, and Alley Watch. She's recently been selected by Business of Fashion to the BOF 500 list of people shaping the $2.4 trillion fashion industry. Her latest venture is Future Tech Lab, which describes itself as equal parts investment company, multinational accelerator, and experimental laboratory, a hybrid created to disrupt and transform the fashion ecosystem. At Future Tech Lab, she's the Chief Innovation Officer. And lastly, Ava J. Holmes, top of the screen. Ava is co-founder of Fashion for Conservation, whose mission is to save endangered and threatened wildlife in collaboration with fashion designers and sustainable conservation organizations globally. Her bio reads like a Sherlock Holmes novel. She's a producer, blogger, executive coach, and a dancer. I didn't know that. And I have only one thing in common with her. We're both brand strategists for our respective organizations. Ava is producer of Fashion Week events around the world, and these combine her two loves, working for conservation and working on fashion. Let me invite each of you, starting with Kaya, to give us a little more insight into what you're doing, where you are, and why you care about the issue of fashion and sustainability.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for all the intros. Super informative. I guess I learned a lot about textiles waste when I was in school. I was doing a project here locally with an organization trying to find a solution for textiles waste locally. And so I interviewed a bunch of organizations around Vancouver that were dealing with textiles waste in different ways. So whether that's upcycling, downcycling, or recycling, I learned a lot about that, and it sort of was really eye-opening to see how much textiles are going to the landfill. So that's kind of what started my interest in this topic, and I went out looking for a job at a company that was really taking responsibility for the products they're making, designing with the end in mind, so designing with natural organic fabrics or fabrics that could be easily recycled. And there just wasn't anything that suited my style. So I kind of I started Novel Supply Co. because I wanted to create an option that was just, you know, comfortable every day and suited a lot more styles than just the hippies here in Vancouver. So yeah.
Thank you. Super. Hippies of Vancouver we'll get back to. Going clockwise, Ava, can I invite you to tell us a little bit more about your background, where you are, and what your passion is?
Yeah, good morning. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for the overview and introduction as well. My name is Ava. I'm currently in Seattle. I've been here for about a week. Previously, I was in the middle of the Amazonian jungle for about 5 months. And we were actually there for fashion. So this is kind of the epitome of the two worlds that I live in. I live between a lot of wild places, from elephant preserves in Kenya to the middle of the jungle in the Amazon. And then the other half of my year, or the other few months of my time, is spent at fashion weeks. So in February, we went to Fashion Week kind of in the middle, and I went back to the jungle, and that's kind of an exception. But usually we spend about 2 months in each place, kind of focusing on a conservation issue, conservation topic, and then we use what we learn there and communicate it through fashion. So Fashion for Conservation is the idea of sharing a message about conservation. I think you mentioned it, but conservation for us is both wildlife, environment, and Indigenous communities. So supporting those kind of three verticals of conservation through fashion for us looks like hosting events. Sometimes they're within Fashion Week, sometimes they're fundraising galas, and sometimes we have one that I love right now that's a series called Cocktails for Conservation. So yeah, we host events. We started to really branch into like our media presence. We've got a magazine that's called Fashion for Conservation Magazine. Bloggers and kind of all over the world. We've got 6 places we do events, 6 cities we do events in the world, and so we've kind of got ambassadors in each of these places that are really excited to sort of do like on the ground field diaries. So yeah, I mean the main thing we do is fundraising and raising awareness for conservation through fashion events, and most recently some media campaigns. And how I started, I think, is a bit of a different story. We'll get into in a second, but yeah, I'm excited to be here. Really excited to have proper Wi-Fi for the first time in 5 months. It's been a while. I'm excited to share more of what we're up to. And yeah, thank you for having us.
Thank you, Ava. You used to tromp out of the jungle once a week, and that's how I could keep track of you. Let me give you, before I pass to Amanda, let me ask you to give a shout out to your 2 co-founders and to mention the name of the organization that is working in Amazonia.
Sure, definitely. Thank you for that. So we started in 2012 because I was working in fashion weeks in the 4 main fashion weeks and also some smaller ones like Eco Fashion Week in Vancouver next to you. And I had these 2 people in my life that were both really inspiring to me, and we had been discussing for a while, like how can we make the industry mean something more than just a pretty fashion campaign? Like how can we not just tell a story but make that story come to reality? And those 2 people, one of them was Nazanin Afshar. She's one of the Amanda, I think you disconnected. Hopefully come back soon. So Nazi is the former creative director of British Vogue, and she didn't really know what conservation meant, but she was very interested in supporting animals and different communities. And on the other side of this woman named Samantha Zwicker, she actually lives in the jungle full time, and she's the founder of a nonprofit that's called Hoja Nueva. And so she didn't really know what couture meant. So this woman didn't really know what couture meant. This woman didn't really know what conservation meant, and putting them in the same room from opposite worlds was how we started. They didn't really understand each other or even like each other at first. So then we started a nonprofit together. And we consider it a movement. It's not just about sort of, one organization, one entity. We consider even hashtag Fashion for Conservation part of a global movement. The 3 of us kind of started that movement, I think, officially in 2012 when we came together and asked the question, how can we bridge this gap between fashion, which is the world of Nazi coming from British Vogue, and conservation, which is Samantha's world, and then me kind of interested in the between. So that's, Nazi and Samantha are great. They're
pleasure to have you there on behalf of everyone. Amanda, let me invite you now. You've been doing lots of interesting work in technology and innovation. How did you get into fashion?
Yeah, so I guess you could say I came to fashion through a different kind of jungle, through the jungle of Silicon Valley. So I come from traditional tech, and I spent 11 years in labs between Stanford and MIT, so very heavily involved in academic research. And my first kind of interest in sustainability really came from seeing all of the e-waste. So I was in the MIT Media Lab, where there's, something like 30 computers for every human in the building, and just watching the amount of techno trash, and kind of having come from mechanical engineering and product design originally, just thinking about the physicality of all that tech and where it was going and what was going on was something that kind of started to invade my work. At the same time, I was doing research in the space of wearables and looking at the kind of interaction between digital technology and physical materials, smart materials, which naturally led me into a lot of textile work, textile robotics, soft robotics, that kind of stuff, and how you sort of manipulate materiality. And then after MIT, I founded an algae biofuels company, which informed a lot of, that's a whole other story, but that informed a lot of my sort of interest in biotech and the future inside of this space, so this bringing together of fashion, biotech, and digital tech. And then I founded a fashion tech, biotech, so digital, algae, yes. I founded an algae biofuels company. I heard that. Yeah, no, I went deep into clean energy for a couple of years there. which was a good thing. In retrospect, it all comes back around. But yeah, so basically from there, I founded a fashion tech studio where I was helping startups basically found hybrid fashion tech businesses, because kind of understanding both sides of the industry. Also worked in traditional fashion, worked as a structural engineer for couture. You can actually make a living on that in New York City. And then and I also was working with some bigger companies as well. So working with Intel and Google and their initial kind of work into the wearable space. And then about a year ago, I met Miroslava Duma, who's the founder and CEO of Future Tech Lab. And what was interesting is we immediately came together on this appreciation for sustainability and fashion, but we had come from extremely different places. She was coming from the traditional fashion industry. She had seen so many fashion shows, and she started to think about, all the statistics around waste and basically this idea that fashion is the second most polluting industry in the world. And instead of, how can we start to do good with the energy and money that's being put into fashion? And she had been running a digital media platform, and she had a big voice in the space, and she wanted to do something for the benefit of it. And of course, this idea of sustainability was emerging. And so we kind of came together around this idea that I have a lot of interest in how science and technology can actually help sustainability, that they don't have to be at odds with each other, that's really the future, this kind of convergence. And a lot of it evolves around materiality and biotech, material science and biotech. And so now we're on this mission. Also, her mission was to have a disruptive model, which I really appreciated, that both has an investment fund, a large scale agency to work with big brands to really kind of try to make the impact with the big brands, also work with the startups, and at the same time also develop showcasing products to show the industry. There's a lot of, I can talk about the allergy between the technology industry and the fashion industry. And so to get show the fashion industry that you can make beautiful garments that are actually sustainable and technological. Also this idea, a lot of what I had been seeing in the startup world, a lot of the really good science wasn't getting funded, and that has to do with how Silicon Valley investment works. And so I was very happy to kind of switch over and have a seat at the other side of the table to start to do the tech due diligence and to start to say, yes, this is what should be funded, and this is what is really going to make long-term change. It's not an app to make another app. It's something that really is about like long-term real science that will change things and how the nature of how investment works in this space to get these new sustainable technologies into the market.
Thank you for that. And you've already raised a couple of the threads of issues that are challenging us with fashion today. But in the interest of full disclosure, I should say I'm from Silicon Valley.
That's okay.
Grew up in Cupertino, and some nerdy guys around the corner from our house put together the first Mac and founded Apple. which has now taken over my high school hometown. But that said, you've touched on 2 or 3 of the issues with fashion, but I'd like to get an overview, and I want to understand better and help our audience understand better. I mean, what's the deal with fashion and sustainability or its unsustainability? We've seen headlines, $2.4 trillion industry. You mentioned that it could be the second most polluting to water,
everything.
Materials,
to
everything.
After oil and gas.
let's go at it. So let me ask each of you, what do you see as the issue with fashion? Currently clothes are pervasive, they're cheap. Everyone seems to love fashion. So what's the deal that makes it now a topic of controversy? Who would like to jump in? Kaya?
I can.
Sure. Yeah. I think it's a really complex issue. And when I was first starting out, looking at all the different ways I could make my business sustainable, I really wanted to make sure that the fabric that I was sourcing was organic. I didn't come from a fashion background, so I kind of was naive in a sense when I started out, which actually worked to my advantage, I think, because the possibilities were endless. When I was like, I want to get fabric from Canada, I want to get hemp, and I just basically had all these ideas. And so I quickly realized that there's very little fabric in Canada. So then I went, I'm sourcing through the States, but they have a fair wear mill in China. That was the best I could do at my size, because I don't have a budget line in my budget to fly to China and make sure everything is being made sustainably and ethically. So there's a third party there that's ensuring that people are getting paid fair wages and they're working in safe working conditions. I also sourced fabric that was not dyed. I tried to find a very sustainable dyed fabric, but everything I found was basically low impact dyes. And I didn't really know what that meant. I was like, what is a low impact dye? Does that mean the factory that they're dyeing is smaller and they're, expelling less wastewater? So basically that's kind of what I was doing while I was sourcing fabric, as well as, everything down to the labels. I was trying to source organic labels and organic thread. And I guess the challenge with that is how expensive it is, because when you're kind of a leader in the industry, like starting out, it's very expensive to start off with. So that's some of the challenges that I'm facing, is trying to make the most sustainable product, but trying to compete with the prices that we have today, which like trying to compete with H&M and Zara and all of those fast fashion brands. It's really challenging, and it requires a lot of education in terms of when you're talking to your consumer. You really have to, like, I'm at markets every week almost, talking to people, and they really, once you tell them about the product and why you're doing what you're doing, they're definitely willing to spend that extra money, but it's really hard online to get that message across. So those are some of the challenges that I've been facing. I've just been continuing because Michael dropped off, and I was I don't know if he's gonna come back.
I think we could just keep this going, and until we see him again, we can run our own show.
Sounds good.
So I mean, I can pick it up from here, and I agree with everything you're saying, and I'll add 2 new points. I think one is to kind of make a comparison with how the fashion industry works and compared to other industries, and for tech, for example, is how I'll frame it. Technology companies generally own the means of their own production. So, Google and Apple will develop the software, the hardware that they need, right? They're all and they'll connect directly to research. And there's this sort of stream of how technology gets researched and then how it gets implemented into product. But one thing that I discovered joining the fashion industry is that fashion companies are never the people who are actually making the textiles, or really they don't have a history of R&D inside of their companies. And so they're dependent on other people making textiles or everything you need to make fashion for different reasons. And so there's this strange kind of disconnect. So you have like the companies like DuPont or Lensing who are working on the textiles, who are very disconnected from the actual fashion companies. And so I think this is a more historic problem. And also fashion companies have historically been very slow to change. And I think this on purpose, because so much about it, and especially when you go into upper angles of couture, it's about craft and retaining that artisanship. And there was definitely a lot of pushback to sort of, stay away from technology and things that are digital and retain, there's so much about the creativity of fashion that is very much maintained in the physicality of the craft, and not suggesting that we should get rid of this. But I think that it's been one of the reasons why this industry itself has been kind of slower to adjust to be able to kind of bring in new technologies, one of which is to have better sustainable practices. And then the other thing that I think I would add is like the rise of fast fashion comes at exactly the same time, which is, completely at odds with this. And, fast fashion, basically right now clothing is too cheap. I totally hear you on, this idea of like how expensive it is. And the nature of kind of the fact that we can get, t-shirts for $3, somebody else is paying that price, whether it be the workers, the environment, whatever it is, you can trace it back to that. And there's really no reason that we should have those kinds of expectations. That was never historically the case. And so thinking about how we actually kind of work on, we're not going to get away from this idea that people want to have changing styles. And that's really a whole lot of part of the fun about fashion and self-expression. And so we just have to make models that can support that are not just about having massively, continuously growing businesses and having more and more actual garments. We can have garments that are made in sustainable, circular life cycles. We can have different models around sort of rental and reclaim. And so there's a lot of different ways that we can employ both physical technologies and digital technologies to help us kind of just change the life cycle of garments in various ways that can kind of counteract what fast fashion is doing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I love that earlier in the talk you brought up that you saw the waste behind technology as an opportunity to contribute to the idea of sustainable fashion. And I actually think that's a really important point that you said of people thinking of artisans and technology, like which one do we support, the environmental earthy side or the tech side. And I think one of my favorite niches in eco-fashion right now is where those overlap, and that's kind of your expertise, which is awesome to have you. But I also, even in the name of Fashion Tech Lab, I remember seeing it and being like, oh, it's the tech side of things, not the innovation side of things. So I think it's amazing that you define that and reclaim that. And that actually feeds into, I think, a bigger picture of eco-fashionism or sustainable fashion, kind of all the words that are thrown around these days. We'll talk about that later. I think that it's not just about the textiles anymore. It's not just about the clothing anymore. It's about also the lifestyle around it, and sharing eco-fashion, different alternatives within that is also kind of just the beginning and opening someone's mind up to sustainable conscious living in general. So I think that's a really good example of how that fits in. The second thing I want to just comment on is the surgence of artisan craftsmanship right now, I think, in fashion, even more than last year. Like this year is really exciting for seeing how different brands and different even communities who are starting to have access to Wi-Fi, who didn't previously have access to Wi-Fi, we're starting to see a surgence of artisanship and of artisans participating in the conversation of eco-fashion again. I know that Berlin Green Show, which happens the 2nd and 3rd of July in Berlin, they are even adding an entire other conference. They have 2 right now, one about textiles and one about, I think, either technology or something around design technology. And they're adding a 3rd all about how artisan craftsmanship is a core historical part of the question of eco-fashion. So it's really exciting I wonder if either of you have noticed that as well, but I'm definitely really excited about what's going on in the artisan world.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that you're kind of in the middle between both. And I think one of the things that I started learning about was automated manufacturing, and it's becoming a thing. There's machines out there. Amanda, I'm sure you know all about it. But that was one of the things that really interested me, because here in Vancouver, I can't speak for the rest of the world, of course, but our fashion industry is, like, our manufacturing industry is dying, because most of the people that are making our garments here are in their 50s, and the manufacturers that we have here, they're full. Like, you can't get anything manufactured. I think that's, like, North America maybe is more common, but and no one's really getting trained in sewing. Like, there's schools that are stopping sewing programs altogether. So it's a really scary thing for me and other local designers. There's a huge community of sustainable local designers here in Vancouver. Hopefully some of them are on this call, because I told them all about it. But I think that may be a solution for us here. It's just a matter of, the technology is still pretty young, and the machines are making, one garment at a time. They take up 70 feet long of space. So for me, I could switch my business model to just making sustainable t-shirts, but it's something that's really interesting to me. And that was part of what I applied for the Young Champions of the Earth for, was to have, like, an automated manufacturing hub where we do research on recycling and compostability of fabric, and have a take back program, and also have a sustainable line of clothing that's made automatically. So I'd love to hear from you.
Actually, by bringing up the issue of automation, this is a real, like, hot button issue for me, because I have, like, deep issues, which is so good. So I want to get this out. So I love this. But basically, first of all, what people don't actually realize is, okay, so the idea of the Luddite fallacy. So do you guys know the story of the Luddites, which is the Industrial Revolution, and the people who were fighting the technologies that were being kind of introduced? What they were actually fighting was the sewing machine, ironically. That was, like, where the original term came from, and this guy named Luddite. So what I find to be so ironic is that now no one thinks of the sewing machine as an actual, like, revolutionary technology that you would fight to keep out of a factory. Like, you should just be handworking because it sustains people's jobs, right? Now, like, sewing machines actually give more people more jobs. It's just this evolution. And so now we're at literally 100 years later, we're looking at more automation, and there's this outcry of, like, oh, it's going to take all the jobs. But there's two things going on. First of all, it's an education problem and not a technology problem. So everything about automation in general that's what's going on. We need to retrain people to have different kinds of jobs that are better jobs, and you'll eventually have more jobs if that's handled correctly. So that's the kind of the idea of, like, taking on the Luddite fallacy, that really, like, that progress in any kind of automation, and specifically in this case robotics, does that. But it is about like education and new business and training models across a system, and it takes a while for it to actually implement itself. And then, on top of that, the other thing that's super interesting, why fashion wasn't automated along with other things like car assembly or all those things that you associate with giant factory arms. Roboticists have not figured out properly how to manipulate textiles at a very intimate level. Like, it's a very hard robotics problem to be able to hold the textile in place and whatever. So what you're seeing is not people saying, oh, we shouldn't automate it. They've been working on it. Now we're starting to get to some systems. I'll point out one. It's called software automation that actually uses visual algorithms, camera technology to track warp and weft, and vacuum systems and things that don't involve small mechanical robotics. And I'll stop here because I'm getting too technical. But the point being that the systems are coming in that will actually allow us to do things faster than you're talking about. And you're exactly right, hitting on having domestic production where you do have fewer people in the factories, but they're making higher wages running the machines. This is the future of like first world manufacturing for sure. That's how we can keep the factories open. Because in New York City, you can't have a factory full of 300 people and paying them a living wage and expect the factory to survive. It's just, the economics don't work. But you can have a factory with machines and say 25 people with good paying jobs. And that's really where we're going. I hope. I mean, I see it.
Totally agree.
But yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
Hello, Michael, you're back.
I am.
Are you? Okay.
Yeah, we had a little hiccup with power supply.
Okay.
But I'm sure you kept everyone on pins and needles. So you were into the discussion of robotics and on how clothing will be made or might be made in the future, and it might be made in places where we wouldn't expect factories to be blooming now, such as New York City, you mentioned. But one of the things that my colleagues at UN Environment have informed me about is in this window of the so-called 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the 15-year horizon from 2015 to 2030, we expect 2 billion new consumers to leave countries that at the beginning of the period were classified as least developed, that is low-income countries, and become middle-income countries with potentially middle-income country consumer habits. And that this 2 billion new consumers who are coming online could dramatically shift the market, shift the pattern of both consumption and production. So my question to you three is, how does this shift impact the sustainability of the industry? And what does it mean for communities that are suddenly entering the market and struggling to find better alternatives than what we now see? Anyone want to take a bite out of that?
Yeah, no, it's definitely an interesting thing of where will a fashion industry be when we have 2 billion more consumers. And I think that you said the future of actually producing fashion is perhaps in automation. I think there's also an opportunity for communities. You said, what will these smaller communities do when they're trying to become a part of the industry? I think to speak back to the artisan point, there is also a new niche opportunity where access to Wi-Fi is also providing opportunities for a lot of these smaller artisans and the communities to be a part of it. So even though there's extremely high competition, the amount of money that actually supports these communities is significant to them, but marginal in comparison to a price point. So for example, I work with one of the communities along Las Piedras River in Peru, and if one woman sold 10 bracelets around 10 euros, like $15, then she could send her child to school for an entire year. And so even though $10 to us is nothing, that in proportion to this small community, to this community members, is a huge impact on their livelihood and their ability to survive without resorting toward things that society is pushing them to do, like logging and mining, these activities that they don't actually want to do. But when society kind of gets closer and creeps up on their land, and they have one of two choices. They can either participate in the reason that their own land and habitat is disappearing, or they can create alternative incomes. And I think that fashion is actually a beautiful opportunity for communities when they do have access, or at least have someone who can support them, as a middleman, to have access to technology and to selling their artisans. So definitely, I mean, the future of mass fashion is kind of an unstoppable moving train. And I think it's a lot of nice thoughts around, like, what if there was no fast fashion? Like, what if we can completely wipe out fast fashion? Yeah, that's ideal. It's not going to happen. I mean, it's a fast moving train, and no matter how quickly sustainable fashion innovations come, it's we have the power of people in a sense, and that's always kind of been the question: is people or what is power, people or money? But in the case of fast fashion, it is a very, very fast moving money train, and I don't think that we're going to stop it, but we can find opportunities and niches within that for people who really value balancing that out, or who really value supporting smaller artisans and smaller brands. And it is challenging to be a small brand, there's no doubt, especially as the competition rises. You could speak to that, but it is also, because fashion moves so quickly, there are always new niches and new opportunities in fashion. I think that's why it's so special. It's not just that there aren't opportunities for new designers. It's not just that it's a challenge, but it's very, very quickly constantly changing, and I think it's also exciting, and it's a positive thing, because even though it's challenging, you can still find your niche in an industry that moves so fast. So yeah, maybe you can speak more to automation, but I just think in terms of looking at the positive side of fast fashion, it also a positive side of access and development of these third worlds. I think that it's also really exciting because it provides different income opportunities for them, not just in fashion, but that's definitely a huge example.
I wanted to also invite our audience. We have dozens of people who have logged in and who are following the conversation. So if someone wants to send a question, you can use the Ask a Question button at the toggle at the bottom of the screen, and we'll try to work your question into the dialogue. But it sounds to me like you both see fast fashion as part of the future, good or bad, and that you see the supply chain extending to communities that may not have been part of the global supply of fashion, both in terms of design and maybe more importantly in materials, if we start to move the dialogue towards how landscapes could provide alternative materials to what we now see dominant in the market. And if I'm right, that means polyester and cotton. Between the two of them, I think they've carved up the world. But both have significant environmental impacts and are on what I've seen as an unsustainable trajectory. So any comments on the supply chain extending to new places and perhaps bringing in new kinds of materials that could make fashion more sustainable and less harmful to the planet?
Yeah, I mean, I'll dig in on that one if you don't mind. I think one quick point on, I don't necessarily think that fast fashion is inevitable in a sense that I'd like to say that it absolutely has to die, but I think it basically has to change. And that's actually more from the angle of where are you going to get these communities of workers? So when you're talking about rising countries moving from sort of what you might consider previously third world to kind of second world or maybe first world, their income levels also go up. So now it's kind of expensive to manufacture in China, right? They have a higher level of income. So then, okay, the companies move to Bangladesh. Now that's moving up and getting better practices. So now they're going to Africa. Where are they going to go next? You're going to run out of places to cannibalize. And so you have to figure out a new model, because eventually we will just have cannibalized the whole world in that sense. So that's one point. But I think talking more about the materials angle, there's a lot of innovation in biotech, and this is where there's real promise of using different processes of biology to create more sustainable materials in laboratories. So these are not synthetic materials. So for example, Bolt Threads creates lab-grown spider silk. So they take the DNA from a spider and transfuse it into yeast cells, and then let that grow. So what you're basically doing is, it's the same process of basically brewing beer. You feed the yeast sugar or some form of some form of food, and then you get, instead of growing beer, you actually get silk protein, which then you can extrude into a really strong, amazing silk that is the same biologically as from a spider. So this is using the process of synthetic biology to create this is really sustainable, because you're not using the resources of land, water, much less energy, no animals, etc. Right? There's a lot of different reasons why that can be the future of new natural materials, how you actually grow natural materials. Same thing with creating dyes. There's a couple of companies, Colorifics and Peely, are both basically sampling plants, taking the DNA, the part of the DNA that actually makes the color, and infusing it into a microorganism, growing that microorganism in a lab, and so that microorganism produces dye. It's naturally occurring dye, but it's made in a lab, so you don't have all the issues of growing crops and the water use, the land, all that kind of thing. So those are two biotech ways that I can see us being able to use natural materials in new production capabilities. And then also the innovation around reclaim and recycling. So this is happening in both cotton and polyester, really new high-tech companies like Evernew, which can actually break cotton down into a liquid form and re-extrude it again. And this is in a totally non-toxic process. And they're creating all new kinds of mixed cotton, et cetera. It allows us to have kind of a whole new chain. Same thing with leather, Modern Meadow and MecoWorks. MecoWorks makes mycelium-based leather, so from mushrooms. MecoWorks does it from bovine cells. This is all lab-grown, so no animals. So anyways, I'll stop, but those are some of my favorite material.
I love the idea that I'm going to be wearing mushroom leather soon.
Oh yeah, and it's wonderful, and they're in tests with major luxury brands. So it's real.
Let me ask Kea, what are the challenges for you as a businesswoman accessing these new sources of material that hopefully bring some promise for sustainability? Is there a hurdle or a barrier that you need to get over so you can get your supply from this kind of technology?
Yeah, definitely. I've heard of many of the companies that Amanda just mentioned, and they're insanely exciting to me. I nerd out over them. It is really hard to access. And I think that right now, obviously, a lot of the technology and things are very expensive and need a big brand behind those. Many of them are startups, and they need a big brand to inject them with the capital to be able to do the tests and the R&D that is needed to make them successful. I really hope that in the future they will be more readily available for brands like mine, and like just having the visibility from the Young Champions of the Earth Prize, and I'm being connected to many people in the industry, so that's helping. But I started out with hemp. Hemp I really loved because it uses a lot less water and land and grows a lot quicker than cotton. But on its own, it's still quite rough. And I knew that when I was developing a sustainable clothing line that I wanted it to be the most comfortable and soft feeling, because I knew that people are not going to sacrifice their style or to be uncomfortable to wear a sustainable garment. So that's why I chose hemp. And I know that the production of hemp is obviously increasing now that the laws are changing slightly, and marijuana is becoming legalized, and hemp and marijuana were lumped into the same category for a long time. So there wasn't a lot of production. But now that it is being legalized here in Canada, there is going to be a lot more companies, I think, growing hemp. And so I hope that one day I can source hemp textiles from Canada. That would be my ideal. And I mean, also in combination with using all of this biotech, because I haven't dyed my fabric. I've actually started using organic indigo and hand dyeing it, which I was doing yesterday, which took all day. So it's very time consuming, and it's a labor of love, and it's really an intimate experience when you're dyeing your own clothes. And I think it brings you closer to your clothes and makes you value them more. And if I can educate that to consumers, I think that they'll have just a bigger appreciation. They'll be willing to pay a little bit more because of the time that it takes. And I think that when you appreciate a garment and you value it, you don't just chuck it away the next day. So there's a lot of things there. And I've tried to also source pineapple leather, which I thought was awesome, but that is really hard to get your hands on as well. So Amanda, if you have any
no, I mean, and she's right. So it's an availability question, and this is why literally I wanted to be on the investment side of things, to get the money and also the time. I mean, these biotech companies, like Bolt Threads, it's more like developing a new drug and getting it to market than it is than making a digital technology. Yeah. So there's massive amounts of research that, yes, you need money for, but some of it is just about time to scale. And so absolutely, we're trying to push it as fast as we can. But yes, that's why it is important to have investment of capital, as well as big brands kind of taking the risk, getting it to scale, getting it out there. And then we'll be able to kind of get it to availability and also, access for smaller brands. So it's exactly right. And also, it's not your fault. It's, because sometimes, designers think, oh, what am I doing wrong? And we're, kind of trying to get the message out there that it is hard to source, and it's slowly coming.
We have a comment from one of our listeners, GC Sustetyo from, I believe from Indonesia. Hadn't heard of pineapple leather, she writes, but in Indonesia, pineapple fiber batik is popular and widely available. Nice and soft, smiley face.
Yeah. Pina Tex just launched a commercial line with Hugo Boss of shoes. So it's actually out there for real now, and you can see it in stores. So it's sort of an interesting. I wouldn't call it a totally a leather. It's like it. I mean, it has the sort of the consistency, but it's an interesting new texture all on its own. So yeah,
it's like felt
yeah,
kind
like
of blended with leather.
Yeah, it's stronger than felts. Like it's stiffer, but yeah.
Let me raise a fear, but also an opportunity. The fear that I've heard is that biotech could concentrate the market in the way that we've seen other technologies become highly concentrated and leave some communities behind. But I also want to talk about nature and conservation of biological diversity. What does the future hold for the diversity of sources and biological resources that communities in faraway places like Amazonia rely on for their livelihoods? Is this something that the industry is concerned about?
Well, yes, and I want to back up for 1 second because it actually relates to the last thing she said in a way. You said the availability question, and I think that Evernew, this back up for 1 second, but their product should be available because right now it's exclusively with agreements with corporate. I know they did a Levi's and an Adidas collaboration. They have a really, really exciting collaboration coming up in September. Keep your eye out on Evernew. I sent you guys a link in September. And then the other one, Pina Tex, is raising in price because they can't keep up with the demand. But in the beginning, it was actually quite affordable. And so that's another example of how the industry kind of just constantly fluctuates. And I think that it'll be more affordable again. But also, we made an elephant-inspired bag out of Pina Tex. I'll send you guys a picture in a second. And then there's also one called Eco Elf. Maybe you've heard of it. And they've got they break down recycled plastic bottles and put that into like a negative carbon footprint fabric. They've done a collaboration with Starbucks with coffee. I mean, you can make material out of anything, apparently. It's just a matter of taking the time and energy and resources to do it. And their textiles, I think, will be available to independent brands, smaller brands, like beginning of next year. So that we are starting to finally see like the change of these startups becoming actually recognized and move forward. And I think the things that have helped that the most are conferences like the Copenhagen Fashion Summit and showrooms and just more of an awareness of that there are eco-friendly materials. I think it's definitely helping. There's even groups, one's called the Sustainable Angle in London, that sometimes facilitate like mass orders of things together, like several designers can come together and buy something, and that's really exciting. But anyway, this relates to your question regarding biodiversity in fashion, because a lot of these materials either originally came from, the inspiration of them came from natural places. For example, latex is actually originally from a latex tree, and where we are in Peru, where we spend a lot of time, there are natural latex trees, and there are actually still communities that collect latex from trees. It's this interesting rubbery kind of like seaweed material, and then that's what latex originally was. So the question around bringing back textiles, just to kind of bridge the gap from the last conversation, is that a lot of our textiles can still be sourced in really well, without exploiting the environment. They can still be sourced sustainably. A lot of the jewelry and the bags that are made by women in these communities are actually 100% grown, basically in their backyard, or they used to be, and they just don't make the jewelry anymore. And the reason it's so important to me personally to start sourcing again, either to return it or to kind of come full circle with sourcing materials sustainably from natural materials as much as possible. If you're using hemp, that's awesome. And you're using biotech to replicate what natural materials originally were. I just think it's such a beautiful way of having a higher value of product, and also having a sustainable product to go and learn about, if not to source from these places. Latex is one example from where we are. People also make a lot of things that are like grasses and like alpaca wool. You don't actually like harm the animal. Wool is are a whole other whole other thing. But what is the greater scope of what that impact is? Like, it's not just about the sustainable textile in that community at that point. It's actually an opportunity to have a land mitigation plan, land management plan for fashion. And that's what's really exciting to me, is that if you've got a community that's really interested in artisanía, that is a method of alternative income that can, bring women the power to the money and not just leave it with the men. But it's also an opportunity for them to be interested in and engage in some sort of land management plan, which is an opportunity for them to think about what is the priority of the future of their land. Like, a lot of, not so much in indigenous communities, but a lot of migrant communities, meaning we're indigenous to another place and moved either by force of government or by force of another industry pushing them out. A lot of the migrant communities don't really know how to use the land or don't know what the land offers. And I'm speaking about my experience in working with artisans in Peru, but this is the case in Kenya as well, when you're there and all across the world from stories of others who have worked with communities like this. And what I notice is that the migrant communities have more of like, just take everything you can from this environment. And so it's also an opportunity for the locals, the original people who live in this area, to communicate and collaborate with the migrant communities, which is its conflict in itself. So it's just on a greater scope. It's much more than just sustainable fashion. It's sustainable living. It's protecting environments and therefore the wildlife and the people that live within them. And it's protecting the future of where they are. And it's all kind of stemmed in this opportunity of artisanías to bridge the gap between sustainable lifestyles and fashion, between communities through fashion. And it's really exciting to be able to see how broad of an impact just having a business and a support system around. There's a lot of challenges. All the normal challenges of starting a small, an independent designer label, plus language barriers, cultural barriers, distance barriers. Some of the communities we work with are like 6 days upriver, so physically being on a boat for 6 days to get to them, and so there's a lot of barriers that come with that work with artisanías, and that's why it's such an opportunity, because as we have more access to these places, which is unfortunate, we also have more access for them to have support through fashion. So I think, support.
I have a really quick story, which I need to add on to this. Thinking about basically this idea of natural resources in biotech. So last November, I was at the Global Entrepreneurship Summit in India, and I met a woman from the royal family of Bhutan. And we started talking about like what their country needed. And she was asking me about, okay, how can I start to utilize the natural resources of our company to help create like income and for our people, basically, create wealth without stripping the land of all the resources. Like you're saying, this push and pull of like, don't take it all because you'll strip it. But you also need a way to kind of create a living for people. And we came up with this idea. So in the mountains of Bhutan, there are these amazing lichens, which are like naturally fluorescent, right? And I started looking up research of, the colorings and all this. And so this idea came up, and we're just starting to work on it, where can you basically extract the color of the lichen, just the color itself, the DNA, and put it into one of these, synthetic biology dye companies to create this color. But the country of Bhutan owns that color, like the right to it, the copyright, the license, whatever it is, to make income. But the dye is actually produced in a laboratory somewhere else. So this is like a new way of like licensing the rights to your natural resources. And so that's kind of something that's evolving as a potential model in this space, which I'm really excited about, because it doesn't strip the land at all, but it still gives income to the right people to the right place.
The conventional biological interesting has a protocol on that. Benefit sharing. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, I was going to say that's an amazing example of supporting small communities still through what's in their environment and their landscape, and I think that also translates exactly the same to actual design. I think we can have a whole other conversation about.
Yeah, that's another conversation.
Digital intellectual property is really interesting to me, but how do you actually license a community that can't do the capacity that a larger brand would want, or even an independent brand would want, but they still have a history and a connection, and they, in my opinion, should have rights, but they believe they also believe they should have rights to these prints, and not only in the materials and textiles, but it's also in the design itself, which is really interesting. space.
We have another question, two questions that have come in from an unnamed visitor. How long do you think before we reach a tipping point of affordable eco-fashion, at least in terms of material, if not design? Also, will eco-fashion only trickle down or spread across? Coming from the perspective of a country like India, where the population continues to grow and the poverty levels still mean eco-fashion isn't an option for people buying their only or handful items of clothing. It's like we as progress, but we still continue to lose time and resources. So a little bit of a question on the end. So again, when are we going to reach a tipping point so that eco-fashion becomes affordable, at least for the material? And will it trickle down or will it spread across? And I think it raises also the question of how we're going to communicate the innovations and the opportunities to a market that so far seems to be driven pretty much by the private sector, as you might expect with technology and innovation, but has a huge public stake. Is this going to be trickle down, or is there going to be a massive spreading of eco-fashion in our future?
I feel like Amanda will probably agree with me on this, in that I think once this technology movement is more readily available to like smaller brands like mine, I think that it's moving insanely quickly. And I think that once that does become a little bit more mainstream, I think that's when the price of sustainable fashion or eco-fashion will go down, because the demand is there, and then the actual product is there to satisfy that demand. So unfortunately, it is still expensive, and I know firsthand that it is, because I've tried to source the most sustainable things down to the thread that I can, but I see it shifting. Like, I see it shifting before my eyes. So I'd really like to hear, maybe Amanda, you can speak to.
Well, I think the point is that we can't take the materials out of context. And that, so yes, the materials are absolutely going to come down in price as they become more available, but we have to think about the entire manufacturing and retail chain in this conversation about what is, first of all, what is affordable? Does that mean that it has to go down to a fast fashion level? Hopefully not, I would like to say. I don't think that clothes belong at that price point. I think they belong at maybe more like a high street price point. But beyond that, we need to think about, okay, manufacturing. So part of the reason why domestic manufacturing, well, making anything in Canada or the US is so expensive is labor. So if we add a little automation into that, we can spend more on materials, less on actual manufacturing costs. So there's that. Then we look at retail. And if you're not, the retail is actually if you have brick and mortar retail, it's the most significant chunk. It's a doubling of the price of the garment. So when you start to sell direct to consumer online, you can literally cut the price in half and still have a profit margin for the designer. So there's all different business models that you can make to just shift where the profit margins are that aren't just about making the material as cheap as it possible. And I think that's what's exciting to me, is all those things working together to change how we make, how we source, how we make, how we sell, is going to be part of it as well.
Yeah, and I think a big thing is also how you look at what is expenses, right? So if buying 20 very cheap shirts from H&M amounts to one really high quality dress, I mean, this is an argument that, if you love fashion and you have to wear a different thing every single day, which I've been that before, so I completely understand. Then there's programs that are really interesting, like Rent the Runway and Armoire, that are starting to have sustainable options that can allow you to do that. But even just in terms of how we interpret expensive, it may be expensive for me to purchase one dress that's $500. But then I think about the expenses of 10 dresses that are really cheap, plus the expense that people on the other end are making, and whether or not it's just a selfish pocketbook thing or thinking about actually someone else and the expense that they paid for a cheaper thing. I am a huge advocate now for less is more. And I think when we think in the less is more mentality, then we start to invest in our pieces as if they're a piece of decoration for our home. It's, you know, it's an investment, it's a piece of art. And I think that is a really beautiful shift in mindset that we also get to make as people in fashion is, you know, if you want to wear something different every single day, there are opportunities for that. And if you're okay with accessorizing or putting different jackets or different shoes or like just mix and matching things more, I think investing in fewer high quality items just more sustainable, but it's an easier lifestyle. It makes things
Is that called capsule fashion?
Capsule fashion. I don't know what I think.
Capsule wardrobe.
Travel fashion.
Point out one thing though about things being expensive. Just because something expensive doesn't actually mean it was produced sustainably, and big expensive brands could just have just as terrible labor practices. So that's why you have models like Everlane that are opening up the supply chain and creating transparency around how it's made and knowing what you're paying for. So I think that because I definitely have had clothes that were so expensive and have fallen apart, and you had no idea how they were made. So I just think that it's also about having the companies make everything transparent and having the consumers be informed about what you're actually spending money on.
I want to come back to that transparency question a little bit later. And I want to recognize Manon Rathor. He was the one, or she or he was the one who came with that question about how eco-fashion will spread.
Oh,
we lost you, I think.
We have a question here. Maybe he was reading that.
Yeah, we could. This question. Yeah.
What happens with fashion at its end of life? How can production consider life cycle of fashion, thus can transform design at the beginning and not leave fashion as waste? Good question.
I love that question. Yeah, that's been one of my missions in life is to make my clothing line closed loop. So not only use all the waste from production, which there is more than you know. So basically what I've been doing is taking all that waste from production and actually designed a kids clothing line with made out of my fabric scraps from production. And I've partnered with a local nonprofit here in Vancouver called AbleWear, and they train women with barriers to employment how to sew. They're actually in North Vancouver. So they're the ones that are making my kids' stuff. And then at the end of life, basically when I was designing my apparel, I wanted it to be easily recyclable or even compostable. So that's why I sourced organic cotton and hemp that was undyed, because I knew that I could do some tests and figure out, you know, how long it's going to take to compost my fabric and what it will take. And basically there's kind of three solutions that I'm looking at. And one is compostability. One is upcycling. So turning it into a new product and extending the life of it, which I think is a very necessary step because we don't have all the technology in place, especially in Vancouver. There's like nothing happening here. They're just starting. It's very, very new. So I'm hoping that I can, you know, extend the life of my stuff. And then hopefully as technology moves along, there will be a solution for textiles recycling for hemp and organic cotton. And then also downcycling, which is just basically shredding it and turning it into insulation for chairs and houses and things like that. Not my favorite option, just because it's only one more life and it does extend the life quite a long ways. So that's why I'm focusing primarily on composting and recycling right now. So I think it's the responsibility of the brands to really look at the products in the design phase and design for that end of life and, you know, creating those take back programs. And I really don't think it's going to happen automatically. I really think there needs to be some incentivization from the government and also potentially intervention from the government, which has been seen in, you know, more Scandinavian countries, and they're actually doing it very successfully. But for me, yeah, I really wanted to incorporate all those aspects and, you know, kind of create a circular model and take responsibility for the products that I'm making. Michael,
I'm back, and I'm sorry I missed the bulk of your answer. But Manon and Sabine have been back online. Manon writes, thank you for taking the question on affordability and trickling down. One, do you feel there is a need for stronger policy action for promoting eco-fashion? Something like individual carbon credit, tax breaks, subsidies for companies and buyers?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that's what she just mentioned. I think the biggest thing, like any government intervention, is actually how you define things like eco-fashion, right? We saw that with organic foods, where organic foods was a movement that everyone resisted, and the government got involved and they created a certification around it, and it worked for a while. Now we're starting to see this bend of, there's a lot of loopholes in the organic food certification. You only have to have 85% of a product be organic, and there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of, loophole around it. It's also very, very, very expensive. And so with something like the government intervening and saying you get, a carbon tax break, or you get something by participating in this idea of eco-fashion, it requires you first to define eco-fashion. And that's, I think, the what I see is like the biggest hurdle of how the government would be involved. But I mean, I definitely think that we're moving in a direction where, if and when the government does choose to create policy around sustainable lifestyle, then that would certainly be a part of it. Maybe you guys can comment on more of that.
So I unfortunately have like a terrible, I don't know, sort of a bigger issue with this. Because I totally agree with you that we should be having policy intervention, but I came from the Smart Fabric Summit a couple of weeks ago in DC, where literally the Secretary of Commerce was talking about the evils of the EPA stopping businesses. And it was just the most direct, like at odds to anything sustainable. I mean, it was really quite shocking. I was stunned by the statements he was making on stage in front of this whole conference. So I was more involved with government policy down in Washington during the Obama administration, which was making some of these moves. But until in our current administration, we're going to go in the wrong direction on that space. If
it's a global supply chain.
US, like go Canada, go Europe, like.
Yeah.
My question,
you can come here.
Global supply chain. Does it make sense for one country to try to create regulatory measures to promote the direction of the industry? I mean, isn't it already a globalized industry that requires countries to cooperate on things like promotion, regulation, taxation?
Well, I mean, there's all sorts of with taxation, it becomes about, it goes back to this manufacturing question where they make, huge taxes on things made elsewhere, et cetera, right? So that's the never-ending debate around domestic production. But I think there's something else that's also very weird about this space. You have all categories of new materials. So for example, take the leather from Modern Meadow. It actually is taxed at this massively higher rate because it doesn't qualify as leather. If it's manufactured out of the country, it doesn't qualify as leather. And so it's in this other category. So it's just this really weird thing where we're like, it's like the laws are just so behind. They're not up with like, okay, new categories of materials and how to actually properly create incentives around it. So instead of that, we should be reducing the taxes on that leather as opposed to, it's like an oversight thing. It's taxed at a massively higher rate.
There was a question earlier also about finance, and regulation is tricky. Taxes are maybe not everyone's favorite topic, but we've seen a lot of innovation in finance for sustainable development, finance for the 2030 agenda. For example, Indonesia offering green bonds. And these are mechanisms that help package financial resources to get them directed to the societal ends that countries have signed up for with the 2030 agenda. Is there an opportunity to support and accelerate eco-fashion, if we're going to call it eco-fashion? I think, Ava, you had some questions about what qualifies as eco, but is there an opportunity then to mobilize finance and help the industry speed up uptake through that? Anybody selling green bonds out there? And from our audience as well, because I know that the investment case in Washington, D.C. Is bringing together some quite interesting people and ideas about how to finance landscapes.
That's good to hear. I mean, I have one thing to say. This is not. I want to learn more about that green bonds program you're talking about because I don't know very much about it. But there's a lot of work in ICO, so initial coin offering. I don't think it's actually gotten directly into sustainability and sustainable fashion quite yet. But this whole notion of a different way to fund startups is emerging because of blockchain and crypto, where you can create. There's this new fund called 22X that came out of 500 startups. And it allows you to create like an entire fund that sort of it funds a series of startups all together, and then you can use the tokens of the coins to kind of give back and sell and trade. So it's too much to get into right now, but that's not government regulation, but that is a new model inside of the traditional Silicon Valley investment world that actually can enable startups in different ways. And what's also really nice about it is it gets around a lot of the issues. If a bunch of startups are getting funded together, it means that there can be more female founders, more minority founders inside of that group, which is a huge issue around investment. Only 2% of all money last year in the US investment money went to women, and women of color goes down to something like 0.1 it's a rounding error is really terrible. So it allows to equal the playing field in another way that's also really important.
It's great that you brought up the normative, we call it normative investment. It's not just that you need to invest in carbon or climate mitigation. You can invest in anything that you value, such as whether a company has gender parity at the executive level. You can have gender investment. You can have investment in biodiversity. Whatever your range of values are, you can package investments so that you can direct flows of finance to those kinds of activities. I'm sorry, I interrupted you, Ava. You were going to say?
Oh, no, it's okay. I just was going to make a comment on the investment side of, I think, social ventures in general, not just even about fashion, but they tend to go through more of a ringer in terms of, why there's a balance between a social venture and then the ROI of a venture. And I'm really excited that in the past few years there's started to be these funds popping up, because it's also a support system in the venture capital and the angel world around how to interpret social ventures. Like, a lot of investors, I think, at first were like, oh, it's a lower ROI, like, I'm not interested, like, why is the money going to something else if it's, a donation-based social venture, or, what is the point of the ROI if it's more expensive than normal? And I really like where we are in the investment world. I think finally we're starting to see funds like this, and finally we're starting to have even a representation within the VC angel world that understands how to interpret social ventures more. And that's a whole other topic, but I have noticed that shift a little bit, and it's exciting.
Bayu writes in asking how we can define the role of the consumer in eco-fashion in terms of creating demand for eco-fashion. How do we accelerate it? And then a suggestion, eco-labels, something else. This comes back to the transparency issue that we parked a while ago. How do you communicate these values to a consumer and motivate them to take it up in their own patterns of life and consumption? Eco-labels?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. I think one of the biggest challenges for me is, well, it's not a challenge. It's a positive thing and a negative thing. But what I've noticed is that in markets, when I'm talking to people face to face and telling them about what I'm doing, they're super engaged. They often buy something, and then they learn something from me. But in the digital landscape, I find it really difficult to get your message through amongst all of the other, trying to get into somebody's email inbox with some information on sustainable fashion and the choices that they can make that will make this industry better. It's really challenging to get through, and I'm obviously not an SEO master or anything like that. So I find it pretty challenging to have an online business, and I know that is a huge way that I can continue to keep my prices affordable. But for me, I'm still a one-woman show. I don't have any help on the back end of things, and find it super challenging to get that message across online. So for me, I still am, going to these conferences and taking part in any of these like forums that I can take part in, and being really vocal on Facebook groups online. But it's challenging. And I think that the biggest thing that consumers can do is actually go out there and educate themselves, which is what I did, not by accident, a little bit. I when I was in school, I did a project on textiles waste, and that's where I learned a lot about the industry, and that's what made me care and made me ask questions to brands like, where are you sourcing your fabric from? What is it made out of? What dyes are you using? Are the people that are making your stuff being paid fair wages? And I think that when you ask these questions, brands are like, oh crap, like people actually care. So we actually have to address this. And also just putting your money where your mouth is, and really supporting those smaller brands and brands that are taking initiative and doing things more sustainably. I think that's super important.
So
go ahead, Emma.
No, I agree with you, but I also want to offer a different perspective on this angle, because I do think, okay, there's definitely a portion of consumers who care about this. When they're educated, they will vote with their dollars, and that's amazing. But I think one other perspective that we can take is, how do we get at the consumers that don't care? And the point of that and that aren't going to care. And so really it's about, because we're already preaching to the converted in a certain sense. And so the real power lies in, like, if you can get your product into Walmart and nobody knows that it's eco, but everyone's buying it because it's the best product and it's maybe the cheapest or it's the hippest or whatever it is that just gets people to pull the trigger, that is where, like, there's huge power. And then they find out afterwards it's better. I mean, that's kind of the way that we should be thinking about the industry. I don't think that that's going to happen, tomorrow or necessarily in 5 years. But if you take on the perspective of people are going to buy my product because it's just the best, then all that stuff is just extra and wonderful, and part of kind of this bigger sort of cultural movement towards education around these kinds of environmental issues. But I don't mean to be dystopic about it, but I also think that it's where, like, real impact can come from.
Mm-hmm. I like fully agree on that point. And kind of when I was developing my product, that was top of mind for me. I really wanted to appeal to the broader market. I didn't want to make a niche product. I really wanted to make something that appealed to everyone. And that was cool, first and foremost, because I think a lot of the time when people think sustainable apparel, it doesn't really have the coolest vibes associated with it.
Your most valuable customer is the one that doesn't have any idea you're selling them a sustainable product.
We saw news last week that some major brands have joined together in the Make Fashion Circular initiative, including Nike, H&M, Burberry, and Gap. I think when you're talking mass market, you can't get much more massive than H&M. You've been talking to H&M recently. What did you learn about their work on circular fashion, circular economy?
Yeah, it was an interesting meeting because it was hard to converge both our models, even though we're both trying to do circular things. They're just on very different scales. And so they were kind of just giving me a little bit of high level advice on creating this sort of take back program and messaging around it. They were saying you want to make sure that the messaging is applicable to all countries, because in India and China they don't want to wear recycled clothing because they're coming into more middle class and they want to buy new and trendy and expensive, and the word recycled does not work there. So it was interesting in terms of messaging, but I think on the grand scheme of things, like, H&M is still fast fashion, and I know that they're one of the leading fast fashion brands in terms of sustainability, and they are doing a lot in terms of innovation. But yeah, it was interesting to see the contrast and what I'm doing versus what they're doing, and I still think that there's a big issue with a take back program, because at the very end of life, like they're a lot of their clothing is being donated overseas. and a lot of their clothing is being downcycled, so shredded into insulation, and a lot of their clothing is being turned into rags. So I still don't think that that's the best solution. So I think there's a lot of work to do, but it's amazing that they are starting to lead the conversation, because that takes a lot for a fast fashion brand to take that on. And I'm sure they're getting a lot of, comments about it. So
they've been leading like the eco-conscious collection for many years, and they were one of the first fast fashion brands to actually come out with an intentional campaign around, an eco fast fashion line. And the feedback was really interesting. I know they did a long in Vancouver with you a few years back, and you're right, they do have different messaging everywhere they do their launches. They had a really different messaging in Vancouver than they did in London even. But every time there's sort of like two reactions to it, right? One is like, this is really exciting, I can still shop my favorite, cheap H&M brand and get the eco-conscious collection. I feel good about it. And the other side is like, how dare they pretend to be eco fashion, because we know what they're really doing, and this is a distraction. And I think both are completely valid. And both are great. If you already shop at H&M, there's an option for you. And if you see that H&M is not the best, brightest part of the future of supporting small businesses, then that's kind of your reaction. But I did think that was interesting to note, and there was a lot of actually quite heated discussion between people in the audience, but around an H&M representative that was on a panel at Eco Fashion Week a few years ago. I remember that very vividly. Yeah.
Well, while we have you, I wanted to give you a chance to talk about how you and your networks communicate on fashion. Ecolabel didn't get any takers. I heard blockchain, Amanda. We'll have to come back to blockchain in another conversation, but being able to document throughout the value chain without any central authority acting as a clearinghouse, but the chain itself keeping the validity of where things come from, whether they're produced humanely, whether they respect principles of sustainable development. That's a fascinating opening. But back to you, Eva. You are a communicator, among other things. Are you dancing on this topic?
Yes. No, I'm excited about this topic. Thank you for the question. I really am, actually, because I think I mentioned before, the idea of certifications, in my opinion, is very expired. It's very expensive. It's extremely corrupt system at this point in any form. So I do think that having either third parties like you're using, or having other systems that are, intermediaries to be able to sanction, a green label or green food or organic food, it's a good idea, but it goes kind of off very quickly unless there's really, really consistent, fast-paced updates and changes, and again, transparency. We've been working a lot with how do we open the transparency within our own, working with the brands. We've worked with a little over 100 at the moment in their unique way of being transparent. And in our case, for example, we really like to go back to communicating the story behind a brand, where it actually started. So, for example, we just had a designer, Kalika Samor out of London. He designed a whole collection inspired by the rainforest. He showed it at London Fashion Week, and we took the same collection and some of the same models from that Fashion Week show, and we brought them to the jungle with us. So part of that time that I was just hanging out on the Amazon, we had a full, editorial team. It was such a powerful communication tool to not just use like facts and charts and database, but look at how much sustainability we have. That's already nice. But if you can actually communicate it in the language of Vogue, that's when you have like a really sweet spot of people paying attention to your transparency. So yeah, we did like a 18-page spread editorial, and every piece was either about deforestation, reforestation, certification, wildlife protection. We did all these, we had this really interesting collaborations with locals in the jungle, and with this designer from London, and with the whole editorial team, to be able to share what his collection meant. It was inspired by this place, and it also helped give funds back to the place. I think communication that's not just technical, which is also very important, but also really like creative and editorial and exciting is the beauty that we have in fashion. So how can we leverage the language of fashion to communicate something that's otherwise quite kind of dreary if you're not already interested in it. So that was a fun project, and I think that's just one example of how we can use, fashion itself, not just media. We can design pieces of fashion that represent the plastic in the ocean that are like really interesting to look at and to see, and that's actually the entire reason that we chose fashion as a medium to communicate environmental phenomenons, because it is such a powerful messaging tool, and it's the most powerful messaging tool on our planet. In fact, it drives kind of the most entertainment media, including like commercial fashion, but it drives a lot of our media. We see 5,000 ads a day, and a very large percentage of those are about fashion. So it's an amazing communication tool, and that kind of, it's the pro and con of having it be the second most wasteful industry and the first most powerful communication tool. So, yeah.
Yeah. Before we lose you, we're down to the last 4 minutes or so. But I want to do a shout out for a bit of communication that I saw you had produced last month on TEDx, and that's Blue Jeans or Blue Water. So if I can plug your TEDx talk, it's worth hearing you live in front of an audience with fashion behind you to demonstrate what you're talking about. Amanda, communication, is it a speciality of yours? I think I read that you're also blogging and jogging and.
Well, I'm not blogging, but for sure. So it's accidental, and I think this comes from being a scientist who has some social skills, and naturally, so I've ended up kind of doing a lot of public speaking, and I did 3 TED Talks, and trying to get out there. How do we, have people, first of all, don't talk down to people about science. Like, these people are fascinated by these ideas, and try to make it somewhat clear. They are complicated, but the world is complicated. And to try to just be, open. And I almost to a fault, I think I'll participate in too many panels and too many things because I want there to be a voice in this space. And especially, there's often not a woman's voice, especially when I'm in tech industry work. And so, and I've done some sort of writing, op-eds, et cetera, because I do have, I think, sort of a strange perspective on how I kind of be where I am. And that offers a kind of alternative view on what's going on. And just generally, I think, talking to what's been wonderful about being part of Future Tech Lab, we have access, with Mira's network to the highest levels of luxury brands. And so you can get, you can go and talk to Diane von Furstenberg about DNA and really just kind of get these ideas into the mainstream and into the conversation, which is, I think that's for us, is to keep kind of get it out there.
I have a quick question for both of you, actually, is what are your favorite platforms to go to for new news about environmental innovation? I would love to hear a plug on where you go to find out, other than conferences and talks in person, like online.
Yeah. It's like you can get sucked in. I mean, first of all, just for general fashion news, Business of Fashion is so trustworthy, like to sort of survey. I know it's not just about eco, it's about everything, but that's is just like this, the every morning check it.
And they do a good job at covering innovations too.
They do, absolutely. Yeah, they're quite amazing in that space. Super on it. And then
can I bring you in while we're in the closing seconds of our show? Kaya, have you some special advice on communication for us?
Yeah, I would say it's challenging because I am, trying to do everything. So I do, however, find time to write blogs, and right now with the UN, writing a blog right now. We write 3 over the course of the 10 months that we are the Young Champions of the Earth. So I've been doing that, and then also writing. I did an op-ed piece for Vice, and I just think it is really helpful to write down your ideas again and again. It really helps to, see how they evolve over time, and also really solidify in your head what you stand for. And I've really tried to take a stance on textiles waste and circular economy, and really trying to inspire other brands to pick up this model and, you know, design with the end in mind. So I think that obviously it is a huge thing. I think that we've also been doing vlogs, and I think video is a huge avenue for that. And I think it's more impactful because people, you know, nowadays don't have time to sit down to read thousands of words of a blog. So I think video is really powerful.
She joined us for the 3rd United Nations Environment Assembly for a pop-up chat on fashioning sustainable development. And I remember you brought 2 other young champions of the earth to that event. So that, you know, was a signal that there's strong interest, particularly among young people, in sustainable fashion. We are at the 90-minute mark. I want to thank all of you, each of you, and also our visitors, those who post questions. There's a lot more to talk about. I think we've just begun. There will be a 4th United Nations Environment Assembly on sustainable consumption and production and related themes, including fashion, next March 2019 in Nairobi. So let me extend an invitation to each of you and your colleagues to come and help us understand what the future of fashion looks like at that event with the United Nations next March. Thank you very much. This has been a Global Landscape Forum Digital Summit in conjunction with the Investment Case Symposium in Washington, D.C. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good morning. Have a beautiful day.
Good morning.
8:40.
Yeah.
Okay, good morning.
Early.
Have a beautiful day, everyone.
See you later.
Good morning and goodbye.
Michael, thank you.